I grew up afraid of my parents, afraid of my grandmother, afraid of my teachers, afraid of other kids, afraid of what I might do next which could earn me a beating. Spare the rod and spoil the child was something I often heard at the Kingdom Hall, and I don't think there was a day of my childhood when I didn't get a spanking for something or another. The last time I was hit by a relative was when I was 19 years old. I disagreed with my father on something, I don't remember what, and he retaliated by slapping my face. Several years ago, I found myself continuing the cycle. I was moving into a new house. Heavy furniture was being lugged about, and my sister had shown up to help, bringing along my nephew, a hyper toddler who, like me, has attention deficit disorder. He wouldn't or couldn't listen, and I was terrified he was going to get hurt, so I pulled him across my knee and I gave him 3 quick smacks. His crying eyes screamed bewilderment and betrayal, and I vowed to never again raise a hand against a child, even if it was for their own good. My parents were beaten by their parents, by their teachers, by clergy, by the military. They grew up with army veterans, with shell shock, with severe religious upbringings, with a cornucopia of trauma. Beatings were the order of the day. It's what they knew. It's what was preached to them as being correct, and they fell in line. So when I went to school and was beaten by a teacher, I said nothing. I was ashamed, even though I'd done nothing wrong. Corporal punishment had been banned since the late 60s, but at Keswick Valley Memorial in the 1970s, teacher-administered beatings were standard. Each teacher's desk sported a strap to be wielded across the palms or a yardstick for rapping across knuckles. And if a teacher couldn't do it, the principal would. My grade 2 teacher used a thick leather strap on me. My hands burnt and swelled so that I couldn't hold my crayons, and although my eyes watered, I refused to cry. I grew up with the other adage of "don't cry or I'll give you something to cry about." So when I got older and the other kids got meaner, I said nothing. I told no one about the thrashings that they gave me. And the one time I tried to fight back, it was the feeble, half-hearted pawing of the terrified, and it only earned me a bigger beating. They were trying to teach me to become a monster like them, but I never dreamed of vengeance. I dreamed of getting in a big bus accident and saving their lives. Then they'd be sorry. Then they'd realize I wasn't a bad person, and then they'd start being nice to me. I felt sorry for some of my bullies. I knew they had it worse than I did, and they could tell I pitied them, and they beat me all the more for that. Patty, the girl who lived up the hill from me, she used to beat me up to steal my lunches. She was too proud to ask for food, so she laid into me like her father laid into her before he rented her out to his hunting buddies for the night. I let her take my food. She never had any of her own. She had scars across her back from her daddy's horsewhip instead. When I was 15 years old, I wasn't afraid anymore. I'd grown accustomed to the abuse, and I would stand impassive while girls alternated between slapping me across one cheek and then the other. Turn the other cheek. That was another thing I heard a lot at the Kingdom Hall. I didn't see the point. If you turn your cheek, that one just gets hit too. And I decided I wasn't going to let anyone lay their hands on me again. I grew my fingernails and filed them into talons. I carried a heavy purse, and I was prepared to fight like a feral cat if anyone ever tried to hurt me again. The first to try was Stephen. He grabbed at me, tried to trip me, took swipes at me while I was waiting for the bus, and I spun my purse like David's sling, and I slammed it down on top of his head. And he never bothered me again. The next time it was Laird. He sat in the seat behind me on the bus, and while everyone cheered, he tried to put gum and glue into my hair. I told him to stop, and when he didn't, I slashed my claws across his throat. Blood poured down his slit neck, and the kids on the bus all took a sudden breath in. But Laird decided to double down. He came in again to grab my hair, and I seized his wrist, sinking my long nails into the flesh all the way to the quick. "You will never touch me again," I told him. And I was right. He didn't. No one laid hands on me again at school. I had felled my Goliath. "Don't cry or I'll give you something to cry about." I was like the fabled boy of Sparta, eviscerated by a fox rather than show pain. I was like the fabled boy of Sparta, dying stoically. I never wept when I was bullied, though I'd weep in private, where there wasn't a chance of anyone seeing my weakness. I didn't cry when my grandfather died, and when I looked around at all the people weeping at his funeral service, I felt disgust. How could they cry when I could not, and he had meant so much to me? How could they cry? They had no right. And then I couldn't cry anymore, not even in private, not out in the woods, not under the covers of my bed late at night. My tears were all dried up, and they didn't come back for years. My grandmother was not a kind woman, is not a kind woman. I don't know how to refer to her in this moment. She's my grandmother in limbo, dying a long, slow death for decades until last week she took another fall, and maybe her dying accelerated. She had a fall a few months ago, too. She gashed her head open, and being 97 years old, her skin was too thin for it to be stitched back together again. September 26, 2022. "She's fallen," my sister told me. "She's fallen. The cops had to bash down my grandmother's door during a wellness check." I can't help but picture the cops assaulting a disabled woman a few years ago at the police station here in downtown Kitchener. I was ready to fight to save her from whoever was attacking her. Her cries for help and screams of pain filled me with adrenaline, and I remember running toward her screams, only to see 3 cops dragging her by an arm across the asphalt, her clothes pulled half off, her shoulder dislocated, and I froze. I brought out my phone to record, and they let her go as soon as they saw it. No proof, just cops standing by a weeping woman on the ground. I can't help but picture the cops who opened fire on women sitting by a fire at Six Nations a few years ago. My friend was there. She texted me in a panic. "They're shooting at us," she said. The cops shot at the women so that they could get footage of angry Indigenous men charging the police cruiser. And since the police control the narrative, the media published an article about violent Indigenous people attacking police without provocation. They still depict us as savages. The racism is systemic. But I mustn't think of these things. I must think of my grandmother. I must think about how those cops broke into my grandmother's house and wonder if they entered with guns drawn. Like the time they did, I arranged a wellness check for another loved one. I must think of my grandmother, the woman who hectored her children and her grandchildren for so many years. She's likely to die soon from this last fall. She was already so frail. She's suffering from dementia. And on the same phone call when I learned this, I learned that my father is a residential school survivor, that he never got us registered for Mi'kmaq status because he was afraid the same thing might happen to us. The last residential school closed when I was in my 20s. Maybe he did save my sister and me. I knew some of the stories about how he was mistreated at school. I knew how he and all of his friends tried to burn their teacher/rapist to death on bonfire night. But I never knew that this brave, terrified boy was in residential school until I was 51 years old. So much makes sense to me now, and so much doesn't. September 27th, 2022. Another message from my sister. My grandmother didn't fall. My grandmother with her talcum powder bones, was beaten. It doesn't matter that she was not kind. Who would assault a 97-year-old woman like that, batter her all around her house? A monster. The police aren't investigating. Why would they? She's a drain on society anyway, probably doing the medical system a favor by dying. It's not like she's important. She's going to die anyway. The cops won't investigate monsters. The cops won't investigate monsters. So here I am, over 1,000 miles away from my Schrodinger's grandmother. She's alive, not alive, murdered, not murdered. Where do all these monsters come from? And how can we keep ourselves from becoming monsters too? October 1st, 2022. My grandmother is alive. Her brain is bleeding, and she's getting meaner. I don't know if she's any meaner now than she was before she was attacked. I dreamed about how my father looked over her house, how he saw the blood on her bed, her walls, her curtains, the floor. Apparently, she's been spending time with the town drunk. Did he attack her? She continues to lie about her relationship with him. She lied about a lot of things. I remember how she tried to tell me that back in her day, no one had premarital sex, as if anyone could believe that. October 3rd, 2022. My mother has to go to my grandmother's house to collect clothing for her. My grandmother won't be coming home. She is incapable of telling the truth, incapable of caring for herself anymore, and she rages. She ripped up my baby photos, the ones which used to adorn her bedroom mirror when my grandfather was still alive. She tore them up. I told my mom I'm sorry that my grandmother is being so cruel. It's no big deal, says my mom, but it is. October 5th, 2022. I'm being grilled by another Inuk over Instagram. She doesn't believe I'm Inuk because I wasn't raised in community. I wasn't raised in any community. I grew up in campers and travel trailers across the country as Dad chased jobs which just kept petering out. Dad may have hid going to residential school for me until I was 51 years old, but he never hid being Inuk, although he called it Eskimo. I always knew I was Eskimo, living on the land across this country. I knew it when I helped with the foraging and with the harvesting. I knew it when I helped clean the animals that he hunted or raised. I knew it when we went out into the bush and cooked bannock over a stick while the tea boiled in the billy. I even knew it when I turned up my nose at the seal meat as a kid, but now I'm being questioned. No community claims me. I'm Schrodinger's indigenous person. Not Inuk enough to be accepted as Inuk by other Inuit. Not Mi'kmaq enough to be considered Mi'kmaq by other Mi'kmaq. This is what the monster of colonization has done. It killed the Indian in the child until that child and all that child's children no longer have an identity. Systemic racism and genocide has turned people against one another. Who are the monsters? Are we all monsters? I don't want to be a monster. I want to help other people. I want to spread kindness because there is too much stress and pain and fear and anxiety in this world. What will tomorrow bring? No more monsters, please. No more monsters.